My name is Natasha Howe, and I'm 31 years old. Last Friday, my mother called and said I was finally allowed to attend my brother's fiancé's family dinner. "Keep your mouth shut," she snapped. "Her father is a judge. Don't you dare embarrass us like you always do, you worthless disappointment. The family failure we wish we never had." I didn't fight back. I simply smiled and said, "Got it." For years they've told everyone I'm the daughter who never figured anything out, the dropout, the eternal black sheep. But what they don't know is this: the powerful judge they're dying to impress has already met me. And by the end of that dinner, every single person at that table is going to discover exactly who I really am, and the devastating truth about what my own family stole from me to get there. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story already has you feeling something. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Now, let me back up. My mother, Stephanie Howe, called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was at my desk in my Hartford apartment reviewing a set of quarterly filings for a client, a mid-size manufacturing firm in New Haven that suspected their CFO of siphoning cash through phantom vendor accounts. It was the kind of work I'd been doing for 6 years. Careful, precise, invisible work. The kind my family pretended didn't exist. "Tomorrow night," she said. "The Callaways are hosting dinner. Craig and Bridget want the whole family there." I waited. With my mother, the real message never comes first. It hides behind pleasantries like a knife behind a napkin. "You can come," she continued, her tone shifting into something I recognized, the voice she uses when she's doing you a favor she wants you to remember forever. "But I need you to listen carefully. Her father is a federal judge. These people are important. So please, for once in your life, don't embarrass us." I didn't respond right away. I'd learned years ago that silence was the only response my mother couldn't twist into evidence against me. If I argued, I was dramatic. If I cried, I was weak. If I asked questions, I was stirring things up. But silence she could only fill with her own voice, and eventually, even she ran out of things to say. "Are you listening?" "I'm listening, Mom." "Wear something simple, nothing flashy. And if anyone asks what you do, just keep it vague. Say you're figuring things out. Or better yet, let me handle it." There it was. Not just instructions for a dinner, a script for a performance. And my role was the same as always. Sit down, look pleasant, say nothing that might remind anyone I existed as a full human being with a career, a certification, and a 6-year track record of work my mother couldn't spell, let alone understand. "Got it, Mom." She hung up without saying goodbye. She never does. I set my phone on the desk and looked at my laptop screen. The forensic analysis I'd been running had just flagged a pattern. 12 vendor payments routed through the same shell account across 4 quarters. 12. Each one a thread. Pull one and the whole thing unravels. That's what I do. I find the thread. I open my email. The most recent message was from an attorney I'd worked with on a federal case. "Natasha, your expert report was critical to the settlement. Judge Wallace specifically cited your analysis in his ruling. Brilliant work." I read it twice. Not because I needed the compliment, because I needed to remember what recognition felt like. Real recognition, from someone who'd actually seen my work. Before I walked into a house full of people who'd been told I had none. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The apartment was quiet. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a kitchen counter that doubled as a filing station. My life fit in 740 square feet. No husband, no children, no house in the suburbs with a yard. By my mother's standards, I was nothing. By my own standards, I was exactly where I needed to be. I'd gotten my CPA at 23, my Certified Fraud Examiner designation at 25. By 27, I was being retained by law firms across Connecticut to analyze financial records in fraud cases, vendor manipulation, embezzlement, shell company structures, insurance fraud. I'd testified as an expert witness in 4 federal cases and 3 state cases. My work had been cited in 2 published rulings. None of this existed in my family's narrative. When my mother described me to relatives, neighbors, or anyone who asked, she used the same script she'd been running since I was 19. Natasha's still figuring things out. As if 6 years of building a career was an extended gap year. As if expert testimony in a federal courtroom was a hobby I'd eventually grow out of. I walked to my closet. My mother had said simple. Nothing flashy. I picked the navy blazer I wear to depositions, the one with the structured shoulders and the silk lining. Professional, deliberate, mine. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I packed my laptop into my shoulder bag. I didn't know why, but something in my chest. Not a feeling, more like a signal from a part of me that still trusted my own instincts, told me I might need proof of who I was before the night was over. My cat, Memo, named after the accounting term because I'm exactly that kind of person, watched me from the arm of the couch. He blinked once, slowly, the way cats do when they think you're making a decision they approve of. The next evening, I drove to my parents' house first. That was the plan. Everyone would ride together to the Callaways. My mother wanted to stage our arrival, controlled, unified. A family portrait she could frame and hold up to say, "Look how wonderful we are." I walked in through the side door. The house smelled like the same candle it always smelled like, vanilla and control. My father, Gerald, was sitting at the end of the couch with a glass of red wine. He looked up, gave me a small nod, and looked away. That was his greeting. Not cold, not warm, just absent. My father spent 30 years perfecting the art of being in a room without being accountable for anything that happened in it. He poured, he nodded, he stayed. That was his contribution. My mother stood in the center of the living room. She had a notepad, an actual notepad with bullet points. She'd prepared talking points for a family dinner the way a campaign manager prepares talking points for a debate. "Okay," she said. "Let me go over a few things before we leave." Craig was leaning against the mantel, checking his watch. A silver Omega he'd bought 6 months ago. He looked relaxed, confident, golden. Why wouldn't he? Tonight was his night. His fiancé's family. His future in-laws. His moment. My mother went through the script. Craig's position at Whitfield and Callaway, the financial consulting firm Judge Callaway himself had co-founded. Craig's trajectory. His community involvement. His stability. She spoke about him the way a publicist speaks about a client. Polished, practiced, proud. Every word chosen to impress. She said nothing about me. Not a word. Not even a placeholder. Not, "Natasha works in finance," or "Natasha has been doing well lately." I didn't appear in the script. I was a warm body who'd been granted permission to sit at a table, and the only direction I'd been given was silence. Then she turned to me. "If anyone asks what you do," she said, tilting her head the way she does when she's being patient with someone she considers slow, "just say you're between things. Keep it vague. Don't get into details." "I have a career, Mom." The room went still. Not because what I said was shocking, but because I'd said it at all. Craig glanced at his shoes. My father reached for the wine bottle. Neither of them looked at me. "Natasha," my mother said softly. "Please. Not tonight." She handed me a folded piece of paper, a seating chart, handwritten. I opened it. I was placed at the far end of the table, the seat farthest from Judge Callaway, farthest from the center of conversation, farthest from anything that mattered. I folded it and put it in my blazer pocket. "Got it," I said. Have you ever been the one person in your family who's told to stay quiet while everyone else gets to shine? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one. We drove to the Callaways in Craig's car. I sat in the back. My mother had wanted everyone to ride together, control the arrival, control the exit, but I'd insisted on meeting them at our parents' house and driving separately afterward. Some instinct, the same one that told me to pack my laptop. Craig glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Thanks for coming, Tash. Means a lot. Tash. He only used that name when he needed something. When he needed a ride to the airport. When he needed help filing his taxes before the deadline. When he wanted me quiet. Cooperative. Small. Of course, I said. Bridget's family is really traditional. Very put together. Mom just wants everything to go smoothly tonight. You get it, right? I got it. My brother had never once, not once, asked me what I did for a living. Not when I graduated summa cum laude. Not when I earned my CPA. Not when I passed the certified fraud examiner exam. Not when I started getting retained by federal prosecutors and testifying in courtrooms. He never asked because he never needed to. The answer to, "What does Natasha do?" had been written years ago by our mother, and everyone in the family had memorized their lines. Bridget's dad was really impressed with my application when I first joined the firm, Craig said, turning onto the main road. Said my analysis was one of the strongest he'd ever seen from an applicant. I looked out the window. The trees along the Connecticut Turnpike were going bare. I didn't respond. But the word, analysis, sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't quite swallow. We pulled into the Callaway driveway. Colonial house. Brick front. White columns. Brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Landscape lighting that made everything look like it belonged in a catalog. My mother turned around and looked at me. Remember what I said? I nodded. Colleen Callaway greeted us in the foyer. She was warm and composed, a retired school principal who still carried herself like she could silence a room with a look. She hugged my mother, shook Craig's hand, then turned to me. And you must be Natasha. We've heard so much about Craig's family. Before I could answer, my mother stepped forward. This is my daughter, she said, her hand landing on my arm. Natasha is still finding her path. You know how it is with young people these days. Always exploring. Colleen smiled politely, but I caught it. A small flicker in her eyes. Not judgment, curiosity. She looked at me the way someone looks at a sentence that's missing a word. What are you interested in, Natasha? She asked. I opened my mouth. Oh, she's exploring different things, my mother said, squeezing my arm. Let's not put her on the spot. Colleen nodded. Led us to the dining room. The table was set for 12. Linen napkins folded into fans, crystal wine glasses, a centerpiece of white roses. The Callaways were already seated. Judge Raymond Callaway sat at the head. 63. Silver hair. The kind of posture that comes from decades of commanding rooms. Bridget sat beside him. 29. Dark hair, kind eyes. She looked at Craig the way you look at someone you trust completely. And at the far end of the table, a small woman with white hair and sharp eyes was sorting through her leather handbag. Donna Callaway. The judge's mother. 86 years old. She looked up as I sat down. She studied my face for a long time. Then she went back to her bag. I was in the last chair. Exactly where the seating chart placed me. Dinner began. Soup, then salad, then roast. The conversation flowed like a current with Craig at the center. My mother steered every topic back to him, his ambition, his work ethic, his future plans. She never mentioned my name once. I was wallpaper. Between the salad and the main course, Craig started talking about his work at Whitfield and Callaway. The analysis I submitted during my interview really set me apart, he said, leaning back with one arm draped behind Bridget's chair. It was a full forensic breakdown, cross-referencing vendor payments against quarterly filings to identify round-tripping patterns. The partners said they'd never seen anything like it. I set my fork down. Cross-referencing vendor payments against quarterly filings, round-tripping. Those weren't Craig's words. Those were mine. That was the methodology I developed in 2019 for the first major fraud case I'd worked solo. I'd spent 4 months building that analysis, named the template, wrote the formulas from scratch, tested every assumption twice. Craig was smiling. Bridget's father was nodding. My mother was beaming, and I was sitting at the far end of the table listening to my brother describe my work, word for word, as his own. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, set it down, didn't say a word. Then Judge Calloway looked at me. He leaned forward, the way people do when something nags at them. "I'm sorry," he said. "You look very familiar. Have we met?" My mother answered before I could breathe. "Oh, Natasha doesn't get out much. She's more of a homebody." The judge's brow furrowed. He didn't look satisfied, but he let it go. At the end of the table, Donna was still watching me. She hadn't touched her plate. After the main course, the judge excused himself briefly. When he returned, he didn't go back to his seat. He walked the length of the table and pulled out the chair beside me. "I apologize for pressing," he said quietly. "But I know your face. It's been bothering me all evening. What do you do for a living?" I looked across the table. My mother was watching. She gave me the smallest shake of her head, the signal I'd been trained to obey since childhood. I looked back at the judge. "I'm a forensic accountant," I said. "Certified public accountant and certified fraud examiner. I specialize in fraud investigation and expert testimony." He straightened. His expression shifted. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. "Forensic accounting," he repeated, studying me. Then the light clicked. "The Mercer case. The vendor fraud prosecution, 2022. You were the expert witness. You testified in my courtroom." "Yes, sir." The table went quiet. Not everyone heard what he said, but everyone heard the tone, the respect in it, the weight. Bridget stopped talking. Colleen set down her napkin. My father's hand froze around his glass. My mother stood up. The judge turned to her. "Stephanie, you told me your daughter was between things, that she hadn't found her footing yet." My mother's mouth opened and closed. Natasha tends to exaggerate things. It was just a small consulting gig. She helped with some paperwork." The judge looked at me, then at her. The gap between expert witness in a federal courtroom and some paperwork was wide enough to park a verdict in. Craig was texting under the table. I could see his thumbs moving fast, not confused, panicking. I excused myself, walked down the hallway, past the bathroom, out the side door, opened my car. I'd driven separately, thank God. Grabbed my laptop bag from the passenger seat and walked back inside. Set it under my chair. Nobody noticed. On my way back through the hallway, I heard something that made me stop. My mother's voice, low and sharp, coming from the powder room where she'd pulled Craig. "She's going to ruin everything. I told you she shouldn't have come. Why didn't you talk her out of it?" "Craig." I tried. She insisted. "My mother. If she says one more word about that file." "I already handled it, Mom. I deleted the email. Both copies. There's nothing left." I stood in the hallway. Still. Quiet. Breathing through my nose. They didn't know I was there. They didn't know I'd already found the email. Already taken the screenshot. And they didn't know that deleting it was the second worst decision they'd made tonight. The worst was inviting me. I went back to the dining room. Most of the group had migrated toward the sitting room for coffee, but one person hadn't moved. Donna Calloway was sitting at the end of the table, her leather handbag open on the chair beside her. She was sorting through papers with the careful precision of a woman who had filed every receipt, every letter, every document she'd ever received. Some people keep photo albums. Donna kept paper trails. But before I sat down with Donna, I had something to do. Colleen had mentioned a study down the hall. "Make yourself at home," she'd said. "Second door on the left." I walked in. Small room, bookshelves, a leather chair, a desk with a banker's lamp. I closed the door halfway and set my laptop bag on the desk. Opened the laptop. The file was where it had always been, where it had been for 6 years, in the same folder, with the same name, untouched by anyone except me. Vendor _ payment _ cross _ reference _analysis _2019.xlsxi. Right-clicked. Properties. Author: Natasha Howe. Date created: October 14th, 2019. Last modified by Natasha Howe. Last saved October 14th, 2019. 6 years of metadata. Clean. Untampered. The digital fingerprint of a document that belonged to one person and one person only. In my line of work, metadata is evidence. It tells you who made something, when, and whether anyone altered it afterward. Courts accept it. Judges cite it. It's the kind of thing that can't be argued away with charm or a well-timed toast. I compared it to what Craig had described at dinner. The cross-referencing methodology, the round-tripping identification framework, the shell account mapping structure. It wasn't similar to my work. It was identical. Because it was the same document. But I needed the chain. I needed to know how it got from my laptop to Craig's application folder. I opened my email archive and searched Craig, File, Report, 2020. The results loaded. And there it was. A forwarded email from my mother's Gmail to Craig's personal email, dated November 28th, 2020, the day after Thanksgiving. The same Thanksgiving I'd spent at my parents' house. The same night I'd left my laptop on the kitchen counter because I'd been too exhausted to carry it upstairs after washing the dishes nobody else volunteered to wash. Subject line: for your application. 3 sentences. That's all it took to steal 6 years of work. Here's the file I told you about. I cleaned it up for you. Removed her name from the properties and the header. Just use it. She won't notice. She won't notice. I read those 3 words 5 times. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Because the sentence was the most honest thing my mother had ever written about me. Honest in the worst way imaginable. She'd spent years building a version of me so small, so invisible, so irrelevant, that she genuinely believed I would never look for my own work. That the daughter she called a dropout wouldn't recognize her own analysis if it was read aloud to her over dinner. And tonight it had been, almost word for word. And she was right. She'd expected I wouldn't notice. She was wrong. I took a screenshot, saved it to my phone, checked that the image was clear. The email address, the date, the subject line, the body text. All readable. All undeniable. Then I closed the laptop, slid it back into my bag, and walked out of the study. My mother was at the end of the hallway. "Where were you?" "Restroom." She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us blinked. "Come back to the table," she said. I did, but I didn't make it back to the table. Craig intercepted me in the hallway. He stepped out of the sitting room and caught my arm near the front coat closet. His grip was firm, not violent, but urgent. He pulled me inside the closet and closed the door behind us. The space was narrow. Winter coats pressed against both our shoulders. It smelled like cedar and someone else's perfume. "What are you doing, Tosh?" His voice was low, controlled. The tone of a man who wasn't angry yet, but was building toward it. "I'm attending a dinner party." "You told the judge you're a forensic accountant. You told him you testified in his courtroom." "I did. The Mercer case. 2022. He shook his head. I could see him running the numbers. What I knew. What the judge now knew. What could still be contained. Look, he said. Mom mentioned she found some of your old files a while back. She shared a few with me. It was a long time ago. I barely remember the details. You described the details at dinner, Craig. Word for word. Cross-referencing vendor payments, round-tripping identification, shell account mapping. You didn't barely remember. You memorized it. His jaw tightened. Mom said you weren't doing anything with it. She said it was sitting on your laptop collecting dust. And you believed her. I needed the job. You needed my work. He went quiet. Then he pulled out his phone, held it up so I could see. The email app was open. Trash folder. Empty. I already deleted the email, he said. Mom's copy too. Both accounts. There's nothing left, Tosh. No trail. So just let this go. For tonight. For Bridget. I stared at the phone. He hadn't been texting under the table in a panic. He'd been deleting evidence, methodically. While I was 3 rooms away finding the email, he was erasing it. Step by step. Nobody cares about your files, Tosh, he said. Nobody ever has. That sentence. I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. Not because it was cruel, though it was. Because it was the exact belief my mother had built the entire lie on, that my work was invisible, that I was invisible. Craig didn't invent that idea. He inherited it. And he used it the way he used my analysis. Without question, without guilt, and without ever wondering if it was true. He opened the closet door and walked out. I stood there for a moment, alone. Between coats that didn't belong to me, in a house that didn't know my name. He'd deleted the email. Fine. I still had the screenshot on my phone. I still had the original file on my laptop with 6 years of metadata he couldn't touch. And I had something else. Something Craig hadn't counted on. I just didn't know it yet. Donna was still sitting at the end of the dining table when I finally returned. Everyone else was in the sitting room with coffee, but Donna hadn't moved. You're still here, she said, smiling. I like this end of the table. It's quieter. She laughed. Short. Dry. I'm Donna. Raymond's mother. 86 years old and still sharp enough to know when someone's being underestimated at a dinner party. I didn't respond to that. She didn't need me to. You remind me of someone, she said. Something about the way you carry yourself. Have you attended any events in Hartford? Legal conferences? Anything like that? My pulse shifted. I presented at a forensic accounting conference in Hartford in 2021, the New England Regional Symposium. Donna's eyes brightened. The elder fraud event. Raymond brought me. I sat in the 3rd row. There was a young woman who presented the most detailed analysis of vendor fraud targeting seniors I'd ever seen. Cross-referencing shell accounts with Medicare billing codes. I kept her hand out. She pointed at me. That was you. Yes, ma'am. I kept it, she said, patting her bag. I keep everything. You never know when you need a paper trail. I think it's filed under F. For fraud. Or maybe forensics. I never can remember which. My heart rate was steady. My hands were steady. But somewhere behind my sternum, something was building. Not hope. Not relief. Something closer to gravity. The feeling of a truth that's been floating finally finding its way down to earth. I was about to ask if she could show me the handout when I felt a hand on my shoulder. My mother. She'd crossed the room silently, her fingers pressed into my collarbone. Not hard, but deliberate. A leash disguised as a touch. Natasha is so sweet with older folks, she said to Donna. She's always been the nurturing type, heart of gold. She was doing it again. Rewriting me in real time. I wasn't a forensic expert having a conversation with the woman who'd attended my presentation. I was a sweet girl chatting with Grandma. Nothing to see here. Nothing to worry about. Donna looked at my mother, then at me. I could see the confusion behind her glasses. The disconnect between the person she was remembering and the person my mother was describing. "Come help me in the kitchen," my mother said to me. Not a question, not a request, a command wearing a smile. I stood up. As I passed Donna, she touched my wrist gently. "We'll finish our chat later, dear." In the kitchen, my mother closed the door behind us. "What were you talking to her about?" "Nothing, Mom. Just making conversation." "I saw the way the judge looked at you earlier. What exactly did you tell him?" "I told him I'm an accountant. That's it." She stepped closer. "An accountant? You make it sound like you're important. You do freelance tax work, Natasha. Spreadsheets. Let's not pretend it's more than it is." The judge called it expert testimony. She stopped. For the first time all evening, for the first time in years, my mother had no comeback. Not because she'd run out of words. She always had words. But because mine, for once, were backed by a witness she couldn't edit, gaslight, or silence. She opened the kitchen door. "Don't ruin this for your brother," she said. She walked out. I stood alone in the Callaway's kitchen. Marble countertops, copper pans on a rack. On the wall, a framed cross-stitch. "The truth will set you free." I almost laughed. Then my father appeared in the doorway. He didn't come in. He just stood there, wineglass in hand, looking at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the combination to unlock it. "Your mother means well," he said. I looked at him. "Do you actually believe that, Dad?" He didn't answer. He looked down at his wine, took a sip, walked away. And in that silence, I understood something I hadn't before. My father wasn't a bystander. He was a participant. Every year he watched my mother erase me, watched her tell people I was a dropout, watched her silence me at tables, watched her give my brother credit for work I'd done. And he chose, every single time, to pour another glass and look away. That wasn't passivity. That was a decision. Made over and over, for 31 years. The judge knows who she is. Her brother deleted the email, but Grandma Donna has the original report in her bag. What do you think happens next? I returned to the dining room just as Craig stood up with a glass of wine. Bridget was beside him, her hand on his arm, smiling the way people smile at the start of something they believe will last forever. "I'd like to make a toast," Craig said. The room settled. My mother clasped her hands in front of her chest, the director watching her star take the stage. Craig spoke about Bridget, about meeting her at a company event, about how her father's firm had shaped his career, about gratitude and family and the future. Then he said it. "When I first applied to Whitfield and Callaway, I submitted an analysis I'd worked on for months, a full forensic breakdown, cross-referencing vendor payments, identifying round-tripping schemes, mapping shell company structures. The partners told me they'd never seen anything like it from an applicant." He paused, smiled. "That analysis was the turning point. It's the reason I'm standing here today." I looked at my hands, white knuckles against white linen. He was doing it again, in front of the man who'd watched me testify under oath, in front of the woman who kept my hand out in her bag. And now I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. That analysis didn't just get Craig a job. It got Craig into the Callaway family. The judge told Craig himself. That report was what convinced him Craig had the talent to work at his firm. And it was Craig's position at the firm that brought him to Bridget. The dinner, the toast, the ring, the wedding. All of it, every brick of this life Craig was celebrating, was built on something stolen from me. Craig raised his glass. To Bridget. And to the family I'm so honored to be joining. Everyone drank. I stood up. The room went quiet in waves, like a ripple moving outward from where I rose. "I'd like to say something about that analysis," I said. Craig's smile dropped. My mother's eyes went wide. My father set down his glass. The analysis Craig just described, the vendor payment cross-referencing, the round-tripping identification, the shell account mapping. I know it very well. I know the methodology because I built it. I know the structure because I designed it. I know every formula, every pivot table, every data point, because I wrote it. In 2019. From scratch. It took me 4 months. Tash, Craig started. I'm not finished. The room held still. Your Honor, I said, turning to the judge. You asked me tonight if we'd met. We have. I testified in your courtroom during the Mercer fraud prosecution. I provided the expert analysis. That's the same methodology Craig just described. Because it's the same work. My work. Craig leaned forward. She helped me with some of the research. That's all it was. My mother stood up. Natasha always makes things bigger than they are. She helped Craig with some background work years ago, and now she's turning it into... She helped a little, Craig said, his voice rising. That's it. She helped a little. Those 3 words hung in the air. And that's when Donna moved. She'd been sitting quietly at the end of the table the entire time. Watching. Now she reached into her leather handbag, the one she carried everywhere, the one she called her portable filing cabinet, and pulled out a clear plastic folder. She placed it on the table. I think I can settle this, she said. She opened the folder and slid out a document, a printed handout, the kind conference organizers distribute at registration, stapled in the corner, printed on heavy stock. The cover page read, Forensic Analysis of Vendor Payment Cross-Referencing, Identifying Round-Tripping and Shell Account Fraud in Corporate Procurement. Presented by Natasha Howe, CPA, CFE, New England Regional Forensic Accounting Symposium, Hartford, CT, March 2021. Donna placed it on the table next to Craig's empty wine glass. This is from a conference my son took me to 5 years ago, she said, adjusting her glasses. This young woman presented this analysis in front of 200 people. Not your son. Her. Her name is right there on the front page. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for dessert. The deep, airless silence of people watching something collapse. My mother's face went white. Not pale. White. The color left her face the way light leaves a room when you pull the curtain shut. Craig stared at the handout on the table. His jaw was slack. He didn't reach for it. He didn't deny it. He just looked at it the way you look at a thing you thought you'd buried deep enough that no one would ever find it. I opened my laptop. I'd set it under my chair when I returned from the study. Now I placed it on the table and turned the screen so everyone could see. File properties, I said. Author, Natasha Howe. Date created, October 14th, 2019. Last modified by, Natasha Howe. This is the original file. It's been on my laptop for 6 years. The metadata has never been altered. I let that sit for a moment. The judge leaned forward, reading the screen. Colleen's hand covered her mouth. Bridget looked at Craig. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I swiped to my phone and pulled up the screenshot. And this is an email from my mother's account to Craig, dated November 28th, 2020. The day after Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving I spent at my parents' house. The night I left my laptop on the kitchen counter. Subject line, for your application. I read it aloud. Here's the file I told you about. I cleaned it up. Removed her name from the properties and the header. Just use it. She won't notice. My mother's voice shook. Anyone can fake a screenshot, Natasha. That doesn't prove... That's your Gmail address, Mom. And the metadata on the original file matches. It was created in 2019, 2 full years before Craig ever applied to this firm. The conference handout in Donna's hand is from 2021, a year before Craig submitted his application. My name is on every version that wasn't touched by you. My father stood up. In 31 years, I had never seen my father set down his wine glass and stand up at the same time. He'd always been sitting, always at the edge of the room, at the end of the couch, at the bottom of the conversation. A man who'd spent 3 decades perfecting the art of being present without being accountable. Now he was standing. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at his wine or the floor or the window. He was looking at his wife. "Stephanie," he said. His voice was quiet, but something in it had changed, like a lock turning for the first time in years. "Is this true?" She didn't look at him. She looked at me. Even now, even with the handout on the table, the metadata on the screen, the email on my phone, she looked at me like I was the problem. "You're destroying this family," she said. Her voice cracked, not from guilt or remorse, from the sound of someone losing control of a narrative she'd been writing for 31 years. "I did this for all of us, for Craig's future, for the family." I looked at her, the woman who had decided years ago that I was worth less than my brother. Not because I'd failed, but because my success was more useful if it had his name on it. "You stole my work," I said. My voice was level. The same voice I use in depositions. Calm, precise, factual. "You erased my name from the document properties. You rewrote my identity to everyone who asked. You told people I was a dropout while you handed my analysis to your son and told him to put his name on it. And then you used that stolen work to build Craig a career, a relationship, and a wedding, while telling me to keep my mouth shut because I embarrass you." She opened her mouth to respond. I didn't let her. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not here to ruin your evening, but I want you to understand what happened. The analysis that brought Craig into your firm, the one that convinced you he had the caliber to work at Whitfield and Callaway, the one that ultimately introduced him to your daughter. I wrote it. Every word, every number, every formula. I have the original file with 6 years of metadata. I have the conference handout with my name printed on it a year before Craig ever submitted his application. And I have the email where my mother instructed him to remove my name and use it as his own." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Judge Callaway looked at Craig. His expression was the one I'd seen in his courtroom. Measured, patient, and absolutely certain that the person in front of him had run out of answers. "Did you know?" he asked. Craig opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Not denial, not excuse. Just silence. The silence of a man whose entire adult life had just been reduced to a single question he couldn't answer without incriminating himself. Bridget stood up slowly. She didn't make a sound. She looked at Craig, not with anger, not with tears, with something I recognized. The quiet devastation of a person realizing the foundation they'd built their future on was constructed from stolen materials. Every compliment she'd ever given Craig about his brilliance, every time she'd told her friends about his talent, every plan they'd made together, all of it reshaded in a single moment. She reached for her left hand. Her fingers were steady. She slid the engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the table, next to the printed handout, next to the laptop, next to the screenshot of the email. 3 pieces of evidence, 1 ring, all sitting together on the white tablecloth like exhibits in a trial. She walked out of the dining room without a word. Colleen rose from her chair and followed her daughter. Judge Callaway looked at my mother, then at Craig, then at me. "I think dinner is over," he said. The driveway was dark. November air. Gravel under my shoes. The kind of cold that doesn't make you shiver. It makes you feel the outline of your own body, the weight of your own feet on the ground. I walked to my car. I'd parked at the end of the driveway, farthest from the front door. The same position I always end up in. The last seat. The far end. the place where no one looks. But tonight, everyone had looked. Craig caught up with me halfway across the gravel. "Tash, please, wait." I stopped, turned around. He looked smaller in the dark. His shoulders were dropped. His hands were in his pockets. The Omega watch caught a sliver of porch light. "I didn't know it was that serious," he said. "I didn't think it would turn into all this." "You deleted the email tonight, Craig, an hour ago, from Mom's account and yours. While I was in the study and you were 3 rooms away. You knew exactly what it was. You knew exactly what you did." He was quiet. Gravel shifted under his weight. "I needed the job," he said. "Mom said you weren't using the file. She said you'd never even miss it." "You had 5 years," I said. 5 years to tell me. 5 years to say, 'Tash, I used your work.' 5 years to mention it at Thanksgiving, or on a phone call, or in one of those texts where you called me Tash and asked me for a favor. You could have given me credit. You could have apologized. You could have just acknowledged, once, that the life you're living was built on something that belongs to me." I looked at him. My brother. The golden child. The one who got the job. The girl. The house. The toast. The future. "You used those 5 years to build all of that," I said. "And you never said a word." He didn't answer. I unlocked my car. I'd driven myself. I always drive myself. My mother wanted us to arrive together. Unified front, controlled exit. But I'd insisted on meeting at the house and keeping my own car. Some instinct. The same one that packed the laptop. The same one that wore the blazer. I got in. Closed the door. Started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Craig standing in the driveway, hands in his pockets, shoulders dropped. Behind him, through the lit windows of the Calloway house, I could see my mother sitting at the dining table. Alone, staring at the handout with my name on it. I drove home. My father called the next morning. "Bridget postponed the wedding," he said. His voice sounded emptied, like a room after the furniture's been moved. "Indefinitely." The judge asked Craig to submit a formal explanation to the firm's ethics committee about his application materials. "Your mother hasn't come out of her room." I listened. Memo was on the couch next to me, his tail draped over my knee. "Natasha," he said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. "I knew you had a real career. I've known for years. I knew what your mother told people wasn't true. The dropout story. The finding her path line. I knew." He exhaled. "I just didn't want to fight with her. I told myself it wasn't my business, that it was between you two. But watching last night, watching your brother describe your work as his, watching your mother try to shut you down, watching you stand up in that room with evidence in your hands, I should have been the one standing up. Years ago, and I wasn't. Thank you, Dad. Can we? Thank you for saying it. But I need you to hear something. Not wanting to fight didn't mean you were keeping the peace. It meant you were watching me disappear. Every dinner, every holiday, every time Mom introduced me as the one who's still figuring things out. You sat there, and you let it happen. That wasn't peace. That was permission." He didn't respond for a long time. "I know," he said. "I told him I'd need space. I wasn't closing the door, but I wasn't holding it open wide either. He could call. Things would be different now." "I understand," he said. We hung up. 12 minutes later, my mother called. I picked up. Maybe I shouldn't have. But some part of me, the part that had spent 31 years hoping she'd say something real, wanted to give her one last chance. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. "You destroyed your brother's engagement. You humiliated this family in front of people who matter, in front of a federal judge. Is this what you wanted?" "I didn't destroy anything, Mom. You did. The day you opened my laptop, copied my file, and emailed it to Craig with instructions to delete my name. I was helping him. You weren't doing anything with that report. You were sitting in your apartment doing your little spreadsheets for nobody. I was building a career. A career? She laughed. A career is what your brother had. A real job. A real company. A real future. What you had was a hobby. That hobby testified in a federal courtroom, Mom. That hobby was cited in a judge's ruling. That hobby was presented at a conference attended by 200 professionals. And that hobby is the reason your son got hired, met his fiancée, and almost married into a family you spent 2 years trying to impress. She was quiet. Everything I did, she said slowly, I did for this family. No, I said. Everything you did for Craig. And the only reason you needed my file to do it is because he couldn't do the work himself. You didn't help him, Mom. You replaced me with him. And then you told the world he was the original. Natasha, I'm done. Don't you dare. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up, blocked her number, set the phone down next to Memo and stared at the ceiling for a long time. No contact. 2 words. They sound simple, like closing a door. But it doesn't feel simple. It feels like cutting a rope that was tied to your wrist when you were born. A rope that pulled you through every holiday, every dinner, every phone call where someone reminded you that you were less than. You know the rope was hurting you. You know it was keeping you tethered to something that was never safe. But it's been there your whole life. And when you finally cut it, the wrist still aches. I wasn't doing this out of anger, not out of revenge, not even out of pain. Though the pain was there, sitting in my chest like a stone. I was doing it out of clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes after you've stood in a room full of people and said the truth out loud for the first time. My mother never saw me. She never wanted to. The version of me she created, the dropout, the disappointment, the daughter who never figured things out, was more useful to her than the real one. Because the real one had skills she needed, and the only way to take them was to make the real one believe she had nothing worth taking. That was the cruelest part. She didn't just steal my work. She trained me to believe it didn't matter, and she almost succeeded. Almost. If you've ever been told you were too much for simply being who you are, this story was for you. Drop A if you've ever walked away from a family that only loved the version of you they could control. 3 weeks later. Hartford. Early morning. My apartment was cold. I hadn't turned the heat up yet. Memo was sitting on the kitchen counter, slowly pushing my coffee mug toward the edge with his paw. He does this every morning, 1 millimeter at a time, patient, relentless. I opened my laptop. The file was still there. Vendor _, payment _, cross _, reference _, analysis _ 2019.xlsx author, Natasha Howe. I looked at my name for a long time, not because I needed to confirm it was mine, because for the first time in my adult life, no one was trying to erase it. An email had come in overnight, from a law firm in New Haven, Patterson, Holt, and Reese. Subject: Referral from Judge Calloway, Forensic Expert Engagement. I opened it. Ms. Howe, Judge Calloway recommended your services to our office regarding a federal fraud case involving cross-border vendor manipulation. Based on your prior testimony and published analysis, we believe your expertise would be invaluable. Please advise on your availability. I read it twice. The judge hadn't just recognized me at dinner. He'd remembered my work. And now he was referring clients to me, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because he'd sat in his own courtroom and watched me present findings under oath with my name attached. I typed a reply. Professional. Measured. The same way I'd been writing emails for 6 years. To people who already knew exactly who I was. I hit send. Memo knocked the coffee mug off the counter. It hit the tile and shattered into 5 clean pieces. I looked at the cat. He looked at me, blinked slowly. For the first time in 3 weeks, I laughed. I swept up the pieces, made a new cup, sat at my desk and looked out the window. Hartford was gray that morning, the kind of gray that doesn't threaten rain, the kind that just waits, patient. Like it knows something better is coming and doesn't feel the need to announce it. I thought about the weeks since that dinner. The silence had been strange at first. No calls from my mother telling me what I was doing wrong. No texts from Craig asking for a favor and calling me Tash. No holidays to dread. No seating charts with my name at the far end. Just quiet and space. And mornings like this one. Cold apartment, warm coffee, a cat who thought destruction was a form of affection. I'd spoken to my father twice since that night. Short calls. Careful. He was trying. I could hear it in the way he asked questions instead of filling silence. He asked about my work. He asked what forensic accounting actually involved. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was getting there. Craig hadn't called. I didn't expect him to. His entire world was in free fall. The job under review, the engagement suspended, the life he'd built on my analysis cracking at every seam. I didn't feel joy about that. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something quieter, something close to grief. Grief for the brother I thought I had. The one who called me Tosh and thanked me for coming to dinner. The one who never existed. I thought about my mother, about the years I'd spent sitting at the far end of every table, believing I deserved the last chair because the people who were supposed to love me told me that's where I belonged. Not because I'd failed, because they needed me small to keep their lie standing. They were wrong. They were wrong the whole time. And the proof was never in the file or the metadata or the conference handout or the judge's recognition. The proof was something simpler and harder to steal. It was that I kept going, every single day, in my apartment, at my desk, with my cat, doing the work, even when no one in my family acknowledged it, even when they told me it was nothing, even when they took it and put someone else's name on it. I kept going, and I'm still going. I was never between things. I was never the dropout, never the disappointment, never the family failure. I was always exactly where I needed to be. Your silence was never about keeping the peace. It was about keeping their lie alive. And the moment you speak, the lie dies, and you begin.